You don't know peace until you've heard the sound of a fishing line slicing the morning fog. But in this neighborhood, my neighborhood, that sound is illegal. That peace is a violation. That simple act, casting a line, is considered a disruption to the fabricated harmony designed by people who don't fish, don't care to, and certainly don't understand why someone like me would sit in the same spot every morning, rain or shine. It was around 6:15 a.m. on a Wednesday in October. The air was crisp, not yet cold, and a thin mist hovered over the water like a secret keeping its breath. I'd been living in this HOA-governed suburb for 12 years now, long enough to know every face, every fence repaint, every passive-aggressive newsletter headline. I moved here after my wife passed. Quiet place, good taxes, seemed like somewhere you could keep to yourself and not be bothered. I was wrong. That morning, I brought my old chair, the one I duct-taped 4 times but refused to toss, and set it up at the edge of the lake, just like I'd done every week for years. Same lake that the realtors loved to flaunt in brochures. Natural oasis in the heart of a connected community. I always thought that was a joke. There's nothing natural about a lake surrounded by rules. They even had a regulation for ducks. Please do not feed wildlife without HOA permission. You think the ducks know bureaucracy? I cast my line and leaned back. For a moment, there was no cancer, no war memories, no mortgage notices, just me and the silence. And then, like always, it came. The sound of rubber saws snapping gravel behind me. I didn't even turn around. I already knew the rhythm of her steps. 3 quick ones. A pause. Another 4, as if counting to make her interruption feel official. I took a slow breath, counted the seconds before she spoke. "You're in violation again, Mr. Harland." There it was. The voice that always sounded like it wanted to smile but was too tight to allow it. HOA President Marilyn Cooper. A woman who'd never cast a line in her life, never gone a day without Wi-Fi, and yet had more control over this land than any man who'd ever dug it. I turned my head just enough to let her know I heard. "Mornin', Marilyn. It's posted, right at the entrance to the trail. No fishing without explicit HOA authorization." I gestured to the paper in my pocket. "Got my resident permit right here. That permit doesn't override HOA-specific wildlife ordinances," she snapped, reciting that line like she had it printed on a post-it beside her mirror. "It's a protected body. The fish are ornamental. They're part of the aesthetic." I laughed, which I shouldn't have done. She hates when people laugh. But how could I not? Ornamental. Like fish were yard gnomes. Like they don't fight for survival or feel the hook in their lip when they bite. Like they exist just for her Facebook photo ops. I reeled the line slowly, just to buy time, and looked her square in the face. "You're telling me I can't fish in the lake behind my own house because it messes with your neighborhood aesthetic?" She held her clipboard tighter. "It's not my aesthetic, it's the community's. We voted. No. You posted an online poll at midnight with 48 hours notice and buried it under a landscaping proposal. That's not voting, Marilyn. That's a trap." Her cheeks tightened. She hated that I read the fine print. Most people in the neighborhood didn't bother. They just paid the dues and nodded. That's how HOA power works. It's not taken by force. It's given up, inch by inch, when good men get tired or just want to be left alone. Marilyn reached into her tote bag and pulled out a citation slip. "You've received 3 warnings. This is your first formal citation. If you repeat the behavior, there will be fines." I looked at the slip. $35. Enough for bait, gas, and a 6-pack. Or enough to remind me that freedom here had a price tag. "You ever fish, Marilyn?" She blinked. "Excuse me? You ever hold a line? Feel the weight of a trout tug back like it's arguing with you about who deserves to win?" She didn't answer, just stood there, looking like she wanted to say something else but realized she didn't have a rule for that. "Didn't think so," I said, folding the citation and tucking it into my pocket. "I'm not doing this to be difficult. I'm doing this because it's the only hour of peace I have. This is my form of church. You go to a pew. I go to a dock. Same God. Different seats." She stared a second longer, then turned and walked away, her clipboard clicking against her side like a metronome of control. I watched until she vanished around the bend. Then I baited the hook again, because I knew what was coming. Not just another citation, something bigger. There's always escalation with people like her. They don't stop at rules, they enforce a vision. A version of order that's less about fairness and more about obedience. And I knew this wasn't just about fish. It was about power. And power hates when you don't flinch. Now, if you're still reading, especially if you're a man over 60 and still have hands that ache in the morning but won't stop working, I need you to ask yourself something. When did the quiet parts of your life become privileges instead of rights? When did being left alone become something you had to submit a request for? I'm not a hero. I'm not even particularly brave. But I'll tell you this. The most dangerous thing you can do to a man who's lost everything is to take away the one thing that still makes him feel human. For me, it's fishing. For you, it might be gardening, or smoking a pipe on your back porch without being asked to move 10 feet to the left. They count on us thinking we're alone, that we're just grumpy old guys who can be brushed off and fined into compliance. But the moment we start talking to each other, the moment we remind ourselves that this land was once built on the idea of individual freedom, not aesthetic alignment, that's the moment HOA boards like Maryland's start to sweat. Because we remember what it was like when you could step outside, walk to a body of water, and cast your line without needing a permission slip from people who never got their boots wet. So if you've ever gotten a letter taped to your door because your grass was half an inch too tall, or been told to repaint your mailbox because the shade of gray wasn't on the approved list, know this, you're not crazy. You're not alone. And no, it's not just the rules. This control wrapped in community branding. Tomorrow morning, I'll be back at the lake. Same chair, same hat, same silent protest. Not because I expect Maryland to change, but because I don't intend to. Because a man should never have to apologize for seeking peace. And if HOA peace means silence, uniformity, and artificial calm, then I'll take the chaos of real life. The splash of a fish breaking the water, the groan of an old chair, the click of a reel. That's my kind of order. That's my America. And if they find me again, let them. I'll pay with a smile, because nothing's more expensive than letting them win. The next notice wasn't a slip. Came in an envelope sealed, stamped, and formal. Notice of special hearing, typed in bold across the top. Inside, a printed letter. The HOA had scheduled a disciplinary review to address repeated community violations and behavioral noncompliance. They wanted me to attend a meeting, not a chat, not a phone call, a tribunal. I could almost hear the gavel drop in Marilyn Cooper's mind as she licked the stamp. Now maybe you're wondering, why not just stop fishing? Why not take the damn chair back into the garage and let it all go? After all, it's just a lake, just fish, just a rule. But that's the trick, isn't it? That's how they wear you down. Not all at once, but in fragments. One small surrender at a time. Today, it's no fishing. Tomorrow, it's no sitting. Next week, they'll tell you your flagpole's an eyesore or your wind chimes are disruptive to neighborhood birds. These aren't rules, they're tests. Each one dares you to say no. And each time you don't, they get a little bolder. The meeting was set for Saturday morning, 9 a.m., in the HOA clubhouse, same place where they host wine tastings and seasonal vision board nights. I wore my best jeans, my service cap, and brought a copy of the community guidelines, annotated and marked like a lawyer heading to trial. If they wanted a spectacle, I'd give them a real American one. I walked in, and the first thing I noticed was the layout. They'd rearranged the room into something resembling a courtroom. A long folding table at the front where the board members sat, facing rows of plastic chairs. There were about a dozen neighbors there, some I recognized, most I didn't. And at the center of it all, Marilyn sat straight-backed, wearing a navy blazer like she was about to swear someone into Congress. She opened the session with a gavel she probably bought off Etsy. We are convened today to address an ongoing pattern of noncompliance from one of our community members, Mr. Thomas Harland. I nodded, didn't smile, didn't nod back. I just let her feel the weight of her own voice. She continued, Mr. Harland has received 3 documented notices regarding unauthorized use of community property for fishing activities. Despite clear signage, multiple verbal warnings, and a formal citation, he has chosen to disregard these guidelines. This meeting is to determine the appropriate disciplinary measures. I raised my hand. She looked at it like it was a fly. Yes, Mr. Harland? I have a question, I said. When exactly did the lake become property of the HOA and not the people who pay into it? Murmurs scattered through the crowd. Marilyn shifted in her seat. The lake, she said curtly, is maintained by HOA dues and therefore subject to HOA jurisdiction. And I pay those dues, I said. So technically that makes me part owner, right? Along with every other person who's ever written a check to this clown circus. A chuckle from the back. One guy looked like he hadn't shaved in weeks. Good man, I thought. Marilyn's eyes narrowed. Ownership does not entitle individuals to disregard policy. Our community voted to restrict fishing in order to preserve the aesthetic and ecological balance of the shared space. There's that word again, I said. Aesthetic. You want to know what aesthetic I see every morning from my back porch? A place that used to feel like home, slowly turning into a gated illusion where freedom is sacrificed for matching mulch colors. That hit. A few people looked down. One woman bit her lip. Another board member chimed in. A guy named Steve who once fined me for leaving my Christmas lights up until January 8th. This isn't about freedom, Tom. This is about unity, harmony. No, I said, loud enough for the words to echo. This is about control and fear. The kind of fear that creeps in when people mistake order for safety. You all keep saying it's about community, but it's not. It's about compliance. It's about removing any reminder that people live here. Real people, with hobbies and grief and lives that don't fit into your tidy HOA newsletter columns. A silence dropped so thick it felt like fog on my chest. I looked around. You know what I see when I walk this neighborhood now? Perfect lawns, silent porches, neighbors who wave but don't talk. People afraid to step out of line because they know what happens when you do. They know they'll end up here, at this table, answering to people who confuse preference with law. A few heads nodded now. A man in the third row, arms crossed, leaned forward. A woman adjusted her chair to face me more directly. I'm a widower, I said, voice dropping. I don't have a golf club. I don't throw cocktail mixers. I fish. That's how I breathe. And if you want to tell me that makes me unfit to live in this neighborhood, then you go ahead and say it. But don't dress it up like it's about rules. Say what you really mean. That I don't fit your image. Marilyn swallowed hard. I saw her grip the gavel again but not use it. Because if this place was really about community, I went on. You'd have knocked on my door and asked me why I fish so much. You'd have sat down and listened. Maybe I'd have told you about nights I wake up sweating because my wife's not there. Or how the quiet sound of water helps silence the noise I can't get out of my head. Maybe you'd have understood. Or maybe not. But at least we'd have had a human conversation. Instead, you sent me a form letter. And today you dress it up as democracy. Steve opened his mouth to interrupt, but Marilyn raised her hand. Mr. Harland, she said slowly, while we understand your emotional attachment to the activity, we must enforce consistency in our regulations. I laughed, not bitterly, but like a man who knew a setup when he saw one. Consistency? You ever look at the surveillance footage from last weekend? You know, the barbecue by the lake with 5 families, loud music, fireworks? Funny, I didn't see any citations for them. Maybe because they're on the social committee. Another ripple moved through the crowd. I pulled out a flash drive. All footage recorded legally from my own property. Clear view of the lake. Want to see it? Marilyn didn't move. That's what I thought, I said. Rules for some, exceptions for others. Isn't that how all these communities end up? Not as neighborhoods, but as little fiefdoms? HOA doesn't mean Homeowners Association anymore. It means hierarchy of authority. I stood. This meeting doesn't scare me. You can fine me, suspend me from the pool. Hell, revoke my garden gnome privileges. But I won't stop fishing. Because the moment I do, I've told every man here that it's okay to lose a piece of himself for the sake of being left alone. And that's not a trade I'm willing to make. Then I turned and walked out. I didn't slam the door. Didn't need to. The silence did it for me. As I walked home, something had shifted. A neighbor I'd never spoken to before gave me a thumbs up from his driveway. Another one, younger guy, jogged past and muttered, "About time someone said it." That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because I won, but because I didn't fold. And if you're still with me, reading this, nodding your head, feeling that low, steady burn in your chest, you already know what I'm going to say next. You're not too old. You're not too tired. You're not crazy. You've just been patient for too long. And maybe it's time we all stood up at our own meetings. Because the more they tell us we don't belong, the more we need to prove we damn well do. It started 3 nights after the meeting. A soft knock at the door around 8:45 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most of the neighbors kept to themselves after dark, unless there was a potluck or someone's dog got loose again. I opened the door slow, cautious out of habit. 2 men stood there, maybe in their late 50s, neither of them familiar. One wore a faded Vietnam vet ball cap. The other had a beard thick enough to be its own HOA violation. "You're Harland?" the vet asked. I nodded. He extended his hand. "Name's Jerry. This here's Wes. We saw what you did at the meeting." I didn't say anything, just stepped aside and let them in. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured 3 mugs of black coffee from the old drip pot I never replaced, because it still made better coffee than any Keurig ever could. They didn't talk about the weather, or the lake, or the community garden's latest newsletter theme. They talked about fear, about how they'd been watching the neighborhood slowly mutate into a silent regime, where neighbors became surveillance, and compliance meant survival. Wes leaned in, his voice low and rough. "Last month, my buddy Frank got fined for flying his Marine Corps flag on the wrong pole. Told him it was unapproved hardware. He buried his son in that flag." He paused. "Frank moved out 2 weeks later." I let the silence settle like dust. I knew what they were asking without asking. They weren't here to thank me. They were here because I'd drawn the first line, and they wanted to know if I'd hold it. The next morning, I walked the trail that looped the lake, this time not to fish but to count the signs. There were more now. 3 new ones in total, 1 on each entrance path and a 4th nailed into the old sycamore by the east bank. Absolutely no fishing violators will be fined and reported. They used a thicker font. Red text. Underlined. The kind of sign that screams louder than the people who put it up. I took a photo of each one. That afternoon I went online and did some digging. It turns out, those signs weren't registered with the city nor approved by any municipal ordinance. Just another HOA scarecrow dressed up to look like law. Now, I don't know what kind of man you are, but I come from a time when if someone lies to your face in broad daylight and expects you to nod, you either speak up or you stop being a man. So I made a decision. If they wanted to turn this into a theater, I'd write the next act. I bought a small trail camera online, camouflaged, motion-activated, 1080p resolution. Set it up at the lake's edge, nestled between 2 rocks near the boat ramp. I told no one. That night, I left it rolling. I didn't sleep much. My thoughts paced more than my feet did. At 6:02 a.m. the next day, I retrieved the SD card and plugged it into my laptop. Took me a few minutes to scrub through the stillness. Then I saw it. A silver SUV pulled up, headlights off. Out stepped Marilyn Cooper, our noble president herself, carrying a collapsible lawn chair and what looked suspiciously like a fishing rod. She set up, cast a line, and sat. Alone. For 23 minutes. She reeled in nothing, then packed up and drove off. No trash, no mess. But what she left behind was far more valuable than a fish. She left proof. I stared at the footage, something boiling under my ribs. It wasn't shock. It wasn't betrayal. It was confirmation. Confirmation that everything I suspected about hypocrisy, about double standards, about the petty little monarchy she ran wasn't paranoia. It was fact. You see, it's never really about the rule itself. It's about who the rule applies to. I spent the rest of the morning editing the footage. Nothing flashy. No music. No text overlays. Just a timestamp, a quiet loop of Marilyn casting her line at dawn, right under the sign she'd ordered installed. At noon, I uploaded it to the neighborhood forum. Not anonymously. I signed it. Thomas Harland, resident since 2012, fisherman since 1957. Then I closed the laptop and went outside to mow my lawn. Took 4 hours. Not because the yard is big, but because 10 neighbors stopped by. Some smiled. Some laughed. One man just said, "About damn time." The video went viral, well, HOA viral. 300 comments in the first day. Someone turned it into a GIF. Someone else wrote a parody song and recorded it with their grandson on banjo. It was funny. It was cathartic. But it was also dangerous. That night I got another knock. This time it wasn't Jerry or Wes. It was a younger man, mid-30s, eyes twitchy. He introduced himself as Tyler from the HOA legal subcommittee. Said he was here to inform me that the video I posted violated the HOA's digital code of conduct. I asked him where that code was written. He said it had been implied in several monthly updates. I said he could imply himself off my porch. He didn't like that. Said there could be further consequences. I didn't say anything, just stared at him until he left. But the next day, my mailbox was knocked over, bent clean at the base. The screws had been twisted out. Not kicked, but removed. Deliberate, targeted, like a message without postage. I didn't report it. Instead, I reinforced it with a steel rod and welded the base. It'll take a damn truck to knock it down now. Then I bought another camera. Now, you might think this is overkill, that I'm escalating things too far. But that's because maybe you've never been cornered in your own home. Maybe you've never been told day after day, in 1,000 little ways, that you don't belong in the place you pay for. This wasn't just about fishing anymore. It was about sovereignty. The sovereignty of being an old man in a young world that thinks age is a flaw. The sovereignty of not asking permission to be who you are. And let me tell you something, brother, there's nothing HOA hates more than a man who stops asking. That weekend, Jerry and Wes helped me host a free fishing Friday. No permits, no sign-up, just bring a rod and show up. 15 people came. A kid caught his first base. An old woman sat on a cooler and told war stories about her late husband. People smiled, shook hands, stayed past sundown. It wasn't rebellion. It was community, actual community, not the curated version Marilyn sends in a newsletter. By Monday, the HOA issued a formal complaint against unauthorized gatherings and unregulated shoreline activity. The letter was 4 pages long. I framed it, because when the system starts spitting paper, it means it's running scared. And I want you to remember something. Every time you get a notice taped to your door, every time someone corrects your bird feeder height or asks you to paint your shutters beige instead of taupe, it's not just about the thing they say it is. It's about conditioning, about asking you to trade your instincts for silence. Don't do it. If you've got a voice, use it. If you've got a chair, set it down. If you've got a line, cast it. Because the moment they convince you that peace is permission-based, they've already won. And we didn't survive this long to go down quiet. We came from dirt roads and stubborn fathers, from broken tractors and worn-out hands, from front porches that didn't need approval to exist. We don't need permission. We need memory. We need backbone. We need to remember that a man who won't be moved can move the whole damn system. And I intend to be that man. With rod in hand and camera rolling. It was the knock on the door at 5:47 a.m. that told me the gloves were off. I'd barely finished my first sip of coffee, the house still silent except for the creak of the floorboards beneath my boots. Outside stood 2 men in dark polos embroidered with the HOA crest. Yes, they had a crest now, like they were knights of some suburban round table. One held a clipboard, the other a small box. "Mr. Harland," the clipboard man said, not quite meeting my eyes, "we're here to inform you that your access to community amenities has been temporarily suspended pending review of your recent actions." The box? It was a new RFID keycard, reprogrammed. Mine had been deactivated. By accessing the lake during a restricted period and encouraging others to join, he continued, reading like a man who hated every word he'd memorized. "You've created a liability for the HOA. I asked if they were aware of Marilyn's dawn fishing session, caught on camera, and whether her access had been revoked too. They didn't answer. just handed me a letter stapled in triplicate, and turned away. That morning, I didn't go to the lake. I didn't cast a line. I didn't walk the trail. I sat on the porch, sipping my coffee slower than usual, watching birds squabble over a feeder I'd purposely placed an inch past the regulation height. And I thought, this is what quiet tyranny looks like. Not jackboots or curfews. Just a growing list of things you're no longer allowed to do in the name of community values. And you know what? I was done playing defense. The next week, I printed flyers. Not digital posts. Not email threads. Real paper, the kind you hold, smell, fold into your back pocket. Each one had a photo of the lake, my chair, and the words, "What's freedom worth if you can't even sit down?" I didn't ask permission. I just walked, door to door, handed them out, talked to neighbors I'd never met, heard stories about lawn fines, surveillance drones, even one man fined for whistling too loudly on his morning walk. That one made me laugh. But it also made something click. This wasn't just me anymore. It never was. A woman named Brenda, mid-60s, sharp as nails, invited me in for sweet tea and pulled out her own stack of HOA grievances. Yellow slips, pink slips, printed emails. One of them was for placing non-compliant holiday decorations. It was a small wreath. Read. Apparently it was political. I asked her why she never pushed back. She said, "I did, once. They doubled my garbage fee for non-standard bin placement. That was all it took to silence her. But not anymore. Not now." So we organized. Quietly. Not in the forums, not online where HOA eyes could crawl through every post. We met in garages, on back decks, in church basements. We called ourselves the Porch Committee. A joke at first, but it stuck. Every man and woman had a story. Every one of them had a line crossed, a hummingbird feeder rejected, a driveway deemed too textured, a child's chalk drawing power washed in front of them. It was surreal, like we were all living in a simulation of freedom instead of the real thing. Wes suggested we start a petition, not to remove anyone, but to vote on whether the lake rules reflected the desires of the majority. It was brilliant. They couldn't call it rebellion. It was democracy. And if there's one thing the HOA pretends to love, it's democracy in well-manicured doses. By week's end, we had 63 signatures, enough to trigger a vote under the bylaws. I hand-delivered it to the HOA office directly to Marilyn. She took it with a smirk, said nothing, but I saw it, that flicker in her eyes. Not fear, not yet, but discomfort. The realization that the porch lights she ignored for years had been flicked on, all at once. The next morning, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice was young, calm, almost too polite. He introduced himself as a community harmony consultant, hired by the HOA to mediate rising tensions. I nearly dropped my coffee laughing. They'd hired a PR handler, said he'd like to sit down with me man-to-man and talk about ways we could de-escalate. I agreed to meet, not because I trusted him, but because I wanted to see how deep this rabbit hole went. We met at a local diner. He was clean-cut, probably 30, with a smile that looked painted on. He ordered green tea. I ordered black coffee, no cream. "Mr. Harland," he began, "I want you to know that I really admire your passion for community." I stopped him right there, told him I wasn't passionate about community. I was passionate about liberty. He shifted in his seat. "Of course, and we believe in liberty too, but liberty with limits. That's what makes society function." I told him society functions when people respect each other, not when they legislate taste and punish variation. He tried pivoting. Maybe if we collaborated on a revised policy, perhaps opening up fishing windows or issuing limited use passes. I told him I don't need a window. I need a lake, the kind you can sit by without a pass, without a penalty, without some man in khakis timing your piece. He thanked me for my perspective, said he'd relay it up the chain. I left before the check came. 3 days later, the HOA announced an emergency board meeting. The topic, addressing miscommunication and community concerns around shared space usage. That was their wording. Ours was simpler, the lake vote. They tried to bury it in procedural nonsense. Robert's rules, subcommittee summaries, limited Q&A, but the room was full, packed. Not just the usual suspects either. Real people, working people, retirees, veterans, parents. A 12-year-old boy who brought a sign that read, "My grandpa just wants to fish." They tried to steer the vote, claimed that relaxing lake restrictions would lead to increased maintenance costs and liability risks. I stood up anyway, told them they'd lost the right to speak about risk when they started punishing peace. Told them that order without empathy is just oppression in khakis. Then something happened I didn't expect. A man I'd never met, tall, younger, early 40s maybe, stood and said, "I moved here last year thinking this was a safe, quiet place to raise my daughter. But lately, I felt like I had to earn the right to live here. That's not safety. That's fear. And I didn't serve 2 tours to live under a dress code pretending to be democracy." The room broke into quiet applause. No one stopped them. When the vote finally came, they tried to stall. Cited procedural clauses. But we'd read the bylaws. Brought our own copies. Under Section 4.2, a 2/3 vote of present homeowners could override a board-level regulation. We had the numbers. We voted. Passed. The restriction on fishing was lifted. The signs came down. The lake was open again. But something more important happened that night. We remembered who we were. We remembered that silence doesn't keep peace. It only masks control. And once a man stops asking, stops explaining, stops apologizing for taking up space, he becomes something the HOA can't contain. He becomes the storm they pretended they were protecting people from. So I still fish every morning. Same chair, same hat, same lake. Sometimes a kid joins me. Sometimes another veteran. Sometimes a widow who brings a book and sits quietly nearby. And if you're sitting somewhere right now, on your porch, in your garage, alone with your coffee, wondering if your story's too small to matter, I want you to know something. It isn't. Every inch of ground you hold with dignity is part of a larger stand. And the world needs more men who won't trade peace for permission. Not now. Not ever. It's been 41 mornings since the vote passed. I know that number because I've been at the lake every single one of them. Same time, same chair, same damn thermos that leaks when I tilt it too fast. The signs are gone now. Those angry red ones that barked "no fishing," like they were speaking for God himself. In their place is nothing, just air, space, freedom, and quiet, the kind of quiet you can sit in without feeling like you're being watched. But let me tell you something. Freedom, once reclaimed, doesn't come with confetti. It comes with suspicion, with silence from people who used to wave, with phone calls from restricted numbers that never leave voicemails. It comes with new faces jogging the trail, eyes scanning just a little too long, lingering on your face like you're a problem they haven't solved yet. I'm not stupid. I know we didn't win the war. We just claimed one hill. The HOA didn't crumble. Marilyn didn't resign. In fact, she's still there, still sending out newsletters about community unity and decorum. But there's a fracture now. A hairline split down the middle of their control. You can feel it. And cracks, even small ones, change everything. They shift how people walk, how they talk, how they look each other in the eye. A few days ago, I caught a smallmouth bass right off the north bend. Not a big one, but strong. Fought harder than it needed to. I released it. I always do. That's the thing they never understood. It was never about taking. It was about being part of something that doesn't require justification. Nature doesn't ask why you're there. It just makes space if you're quiet enough. I've started noticing something new. Every so often, someone joins me. Not to fish, most just sit. Jerry, Wes, even Brenda came out once with a folding stool and a Tupperware full of deviled eggs. We didn't say much. Just watched the sun break over the trees and listened to the water lap against the rocks. The strange how community forms. Not through meetings or mandates, but through shared silence, through presence. Then, last Thursday, something happened. I found a letter on my porch, taped crooked to the door like it was left in a hurry. No envelope, just a single page. Typed, no signature. It read, You think this is over? You think a vote makes you untouchable? Watch your back, old man. The lake's not yours. It never was. I sat down in my porch chair and read it again. Not with fear, with clarity, because that letter said more than it intended. It told me that the fight still mattered, that the other side wasn't just annoyed, they were afraid. Not of me, but of what I represented. A man past his so-called usefulness who refused to go quietly. So I made a choice. I framed that letter, put it right next to the frame citation from the HOA and the photo from Free Fishing Friday. Call it my wall of resistance. Every movement has its banners. These are mine. But something deeper started gnawing at me. A question I hadn't allowed myself to ask during the fight. What happens now? When the adrenaline fades? When the crowd goes home? When the lake is quiet and the lines are cast and peace, real peace, finally arrives? What do you do with it? Most men don't talk about that part. They talk about battles, about standing their ground, about the moment of defiance. But what happens after the dust settles? I'll tell you what happens. You're left with yourself, with the parts of you that still ache, with the nights that still wake you up at 2:13 a.m. without explanation, with memories that don't care if you've earned your rest. You see, this wasn't just about HOA rules. It was about being seen, heard, not dismissed because your hair is gray and your knees crack when you stand too fast. Not erased because you've lived long enough to know what matters. That's what every man over 60 needs to hear. You are still the bedrock, even when the world tries to build on top of you without asking. 2 nights ago, I went back to the meeting hall. Empty, of course, locked, but I stood out front anyway, staring at the same door where they once tried to vote me into silence. I stood there for half an hour, not as a statement, just to remember. Then this morning, something different happened. A boy, maybe 9, maybe 10, rode his bike up to where I was fishing. Skinny arms, scuffed sneakers. He stopped, looked at me, then the lake. "You're the guy from the video," he said. I nodded. "You want to learn?" I asked. He nodded, didn't even speak, just sat. I handed him a second rod I kept in the truck. Showed him how to bait the hook, how to cast without whipping it like a lasso. He didn't catch anything. But when his mom came to fetch him, she looked me in the eye and said, "Thank you. He doesn't talk to many people." I told her he didn't need to talk to fish. Just listen. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something else. Maybe not a revolution. Maybe not a movement. But a legacy. One old man with a rod, a chair, and the patience to teach silence to the next generation. Because freedom isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It just needs to be protected, nurtured, passed down like an old tackle box full of stories. So here I am, 41 days in, still casting, still showing up, still listening, because I'm not done yet, and neither are you. If you've made it this far reading this, nodding along, maybe thinking of that one rule that finally made you snap, then I want to leave you with this: you don't have to roar to be heard. You just have to stand, sit, cast. Whatever it is you do that reminds the world you're still here, do it. Because the lake may not belong to me, but I belong to it. And as long as I do, no one, not a board, not a rule, not a threat, gets to tell me how to exist. Not while I can still tie a knot, still bait a hook, still feel the weight of the morning in my hands like something sacred. And if someday someone else sits in my chair, uses my rod, tells my story, then good. It means I did more than fight. It means I left something behind worth protecting.